Next in the box model, we have margin. So remember that margin is the space around an element or between all the elements. All right, so to apply margin, let's go ahead and add those sections back in that we did previously in a past video. So I'm going to go back to my HTML document. And so I'm going to add just another section here. Go ahead and save that. And if we take a look at our preview, let me open that up so we can have it over on the right. I can see I still have this pink border at the bottom of each section. So I have two sections. I have this pink border twice because remember, I'm using an element selector over in my CSS. Element selector targets all instances of that element. So here where I have section, anything in here targets every instance of that element. We'll talk more later about the other types of elements, the other types of selectors, the class selector and the ID selector. But for now, we're just going to use the more global element selector. All right, moving on to margin. Margin can be set for top, left, right, or bottom of an element. You could do all four, you could do one of each, you could do 2, 3, whatever you want to. So I need first my semicolon because I'm going to add another property and value set. And I'm going to add margin dash top. Let's go ahead and give it 20 pixels. Let's add margin dash, let's do right. I'm going to do, again, 20 pixels. Margin dash bottom, again, 20 pixels. And margin dash left, 20 pixels. Okay, over my preview, let me move my cursor so we can actually see what's going on. There we go. So we now have 20 pixels added to each side of our element. We saw with border how when you repeat that property name, margin top, margin, 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 we can shorthand that into just margin. So because the property value that we gave to margin in each of these is the same, 20 pixels, we can just write that as one. So instead of all of these, I could shorthand into just margin. Clean this up a little. Add 20 pix, and I get the same result. So it's cleaner code. So I can see over here, I still have 20 pix on all sides. There is a way of adding all these different values and then how they will be applied. So let's start with combining not just this one value, but we'll combine them all together. So because there are 4 sides, I can add 4 values here. So I have 20 pix for the first. Let's do 10 pix for the next, 20 pix after that, and again 10 pix. So when you write shorthand all 4 values, the first value will always be the top. Then it moves clockwise. So the second value is the right. The third value is the bottom, and the fourth value is the left. So if I wanted to clean this up even further, I could. So let's say I add 3 values instead of 4. So let me take away this last value. When you have 3 values, again, as always, the first value will always go to the top. So here I have the top is 20 pixels. But because I only have 3 values now, the second value is going to go to both the left and the right, whatever is opposite. Then the third value is the bottom. right now I see that my top and bottom value is the same, so I could clean this up even more. So instead of 3 values, I'm going to take this down to 2. So here, when I have 2 values, the first value again always to the top, but when there are 2 values, it also goes to the opposite, the bottom. The second value goes to the left and the right. And then of course, again, I could take that all the way down to 1 value, and if I have 1 value, it goes to all 4 sides. So a lot of different ways that you can make the same thing happen, but you always want to strive for the cleanest code. All right, with margin, you can also have a negative value, and that will allow it to overlap another element. So let's take a look at that. So here, if I say margin, let's do margin dash top, and I'm going to do a negative 20 pixels. And then look at my preview. I have actually taken that second section and moved it on top of the first section. And if the first section wasn't already up against the top and there was another element there, it would also go negative since I have an element selector, and it would apply this to all sections. So using a negative value, just adding the minus sign before the value, you can move on top of something else. And last but not least, let's go ahead and set a margin. And for this, I'm going to take it all the way back to just margin. And I'm going to do margin 0. Margin 0. Let me move my cursor so you can see here. So margin 0 for the browser I'm viewing this in, which is Chrome, is actually the default. So I can see now it's back to how it looked before I did any margin at all. That's not going to always be the case. Sometimes you will need to add a margin of 0. Or if you want to be sure every browser does not add any margin to any element, you could set it to 0. Keeping in mind a couple things about setting a value to 0. You don't need to add a measuring unit. So it's not 0 pixels or 0%, it's just 0, because 0% and 0 pixels is 0. It doesn't matter what measuring unit, 0 is 0. However, if you do want to be sure that a value is 0, you don't want to always rely on browser defaults thinking maybe it will be 0. You want to define it if you want it for sure to be 0. All right, in the next video, we'll move on to padding.